The African continent, the cradle of humanity, a land of ancient civilizations and seething passions, has witnessed many dark chapters in its history. Among them are stories where the price of power is so high, it's measured in human lives. Tales of political assassinations that, like venomous arrows, pierced the fabric of society, leaving behind deep scars of mistrust, fear, and unresolved pain. Today, we turn to such cases where politics, personal ambition, and tyranny intertwined in a deadly knot, claiming the lives of those who dared to speak the truth, or simply stood in the way of those craving unlimited power. Our narrative begins on the dusty but vital streets of Cameroon, where the tragedy of journalist Martinez Zogo unfolded in the shadows of sprawling rainforests and against the backdrop of bustling markets. He was not just a reporter, but the voice of many who feared speaking, a man who, with his incisive reporting, exposed the ulcers of corruption and abuse that flourished deep within the state apparatus. His channel, Ebène FM, became a true platform for those seeking justice, but for those who feared exposure, he was an enemy who needed to be eliminated. This occurred in January of 2023. The year was 2023, and Cameroonian society, like many African nations, faced challenges associated with authoritarian regimes, restrictions on freedom of speech, and constant pressure on civil society. Zogo, a brave and uncompromising man, was unafraid to go against the current. Martinez Zogo specialized in investigations, penetrating the highest circles of power. He relentlessly exposed shadowy schemes of embezzlement and dirty, corrupt deals that undermined the very foundations of the state. His reports, distinguished by meticulous detail and irrefutable evidence, consistently caused widespread public outcry, compelling society to discuss its most pressing issues. Yet, with every such publication, he edged closer to a dangerous precipice, where his courage could cost him his life. Picture that evening, when everything abruptly ended. Dusk was deepening, wrapping the city in the prelude to night, and the streets were gradually falling silent, preparing for slumber. But for Martinez Zogo, this evening proved fatal, his last. He was returning home, perhaps lost in thought about a sensational forthcoming article that could change much, or perhaps simply savoring the long-awaited coolness after an exhaustingly hot day. Exactly what transpired in those final, inescapable moments of his life will forever remain shrouded in the hazy veil of terrifying uncertainty. Only one thing is known. His body was discovered not far from his home. This was no ordinary murder, but a meticulously planned public execution, designed to instill fear and silence anyone daring to follow his bold path. The traces of violence were horrific, screaming of the attacker's extreme cruelty and sophistication. News of this tragic event shook Cameroonian society to its core, igniting a wave of grief and outrage. Journalists, human rights activists, ordinary citizens, everyone felt the chilling breath of fear. Zogo's murder proved to be more than just an act of random violence. It was a painful blow struck at the very heart of free speech, at its fragile yet vital space. The investigation into this case began immediately, but, as sadly often happens in such circumstances, it immediately encountered a series of seemingly insurmountable difficulties. Local authorities, despite loud pronouncements of their unwavering commitment to the triumph of justice, were under colossal pressure that was felt everywhere. The absence of truly independent institutions, deep-rooted corruption at various levels, and an all-encompassing fear of potential career repercussions. All these factors could become a serious, almost insurmountable obstacle on the path to discovering the truth. Investigators had to work in extremely unfavorable conditions, where every step taken could turn into unpredictable risk, where any valuable information was worth its weight in gold and was extremely scarce, and where witnesses, overcome by fear, preferred to remain silent. Zogo himself, as it later emerged, had received threats, but being a man of unshakable principles, he had no intention of backing down from his beliefs. He genuinely believed that truth, against all odds, would eventually triumph. However, as subsequent events unfolded, his faith proved overly optimistic in this complex world, where power often preferred to operate from deep, impenetrable shadows. As the case gradually gained momentum, new, unsettling details began to emerge, increasingly pointing to a well-concealed political motive behind this monstrous crime. Among the potential instigators were those behind the dark dealings that Zogo had been attempting to expose. These were individuals from the highest echelons of society, people whose fortunes were built on corruption, and whose privileged positions were threatened by Zogo's relentless journalistic efforts. What began as a murder investigation had transformed into a fierce struggle for justice. On one side, those who craved truth, and on the other, those willing to go to any lengths to maintain their power and preserve their dominant status. A similar, yet fundamentally different drama unfolded in Eswatini, formerly known as Swaziland. Here the victim was Thulani Rudolph Maseko, a widely respected human rights advocate and lawyer. His name had become synonymous with the fight for democracy and human rights in a country where the political landscape was severely constricted. Eswatini, remaining one of the last absolute monarchies on the African continent, had always been characterized by the strictest control over public life and the ruthless suppression of any dissent. Maseko, who became the voice of his people, openly spoke out against the authoritarian regime, demanding reforms and democratic freedoms. He was a thorn in the side of those who sought to preserve the existing order. This tragedy occurred in October of 2021. Like Zogo, Maseko was killed in his own home, surrounded by his family. It was a brutal, cold-blooded attack, demonstrating that the perpetrators acted without the slightest hesitation, leaving no chance. As with the Cameroonian journalist, Maseko's murder sparked a powerful wave of outrage, both within the country and far beyond its borders. International human rights organizations issued strong statements, demanding that the authorities in Eswatini conduct a comprehensive, thorough investigation and find those responsible. However, in a country where political space had been narrowed to the absolute limit, where open criticism of power could lead to the most fatal consequences, the search for truth became an extremely difficult task. Investigators faced the same insurmountable challenges as their colleagues in Cameroon. A lack of necessary resources, an almost complete absence of transparency in the work of government bodies, and quite possibly, direct interference from those who had a vested interest in concealing the truth. Maseko, like many other brave activists operating under similar authoritarian regimes, lived under constant, debilitating pressure, received numerous threats, but despite everything, continued his vital work, sincerely believing in the unwavering power of law and justice. His wife, the mother of their shared children, found herself not only a witness to a monstrous, irreparable loss, but also undertaking the most arduous path of struggle, ensuring the memory of her husband would never be forgotten and his noble cause would not remain unfinished. Maseko's story is not merely a tragic tale of murder. It is, above all, a testament to the indomitable resilience of the human spirit, to the refusal to bow or surrender in the face of brutal tyranny. Let us transport ourselves now to South Africa, to 1993. It was a time when the country stood on the precipice of immense change, at a crossroads, on the eve of apartheid's downfall. The road to democracy proved thorny, paved with contradictions and stained with blood. And it was at this critical, tense moment that an event occurred capable of casting the nation back into the abyss of civil war: the tragic assassination of Chris Hani. Hani was not just a leader, but a true inspirer, the charismatic head of the South African Communist Party and a prominent figure in the African National Congress. For millions, he was the living embodiment of the struggle against the apartheid system, a figure whose popularity among the black population reached truly nationwide proportions. His death, it seemed, was a calculated blow, struck with the sole aim of undermining the fragile, nascent process of transition to democracy, sowing panic, chaos, and boundless discord. The assassination took place at the threshold of his home in Pretoria. The perpetrator of the crime was accused to be John Adolf Long, an immigrant from Poland, whose far-right views and fierce rejection of any change had driven him to a path of violence. Despite Long being sentenced, the story of Chris Hani's murder still left behind a trail of unresolved questions. Did he have accomplices? Who truly stood behind this assassination, if it even happened at all? In the political climate of that era, any version seemed entirely plausible. Hani's loss became a true national tragedy. Hundreds of thousands of people arrived at his funeral to express their grief and righteous anger. It felt as though the country was on the verge of collapsing into an abyss. However, fortunately, thanks to the tireless efforts of many, including Nelson Mandela, South Africa managed to avert a full-scale war. These three stories, separated by time and geography, but united by an invisible thread: the price paid for power and the ruthless struggle against any dissent, vividly demonstrate how fragile peace can be when the ambitions of some are placed above the lives of others. These instances reveal that even in the darkest of times, when the threat feels all-encompassing and inevitable, there will always be individuals prepared to go to the very end for the sake of truth and justice. Before us are the tales of courageous journalists who risk everything to bring truth to society, of tireless human rights advocates fighting for the rights of the voiceless, and of political leaders whose own lives become held hostage in the struggle for a better future for all. What, beyond the victims themselves and their arduous struggles, unites these tragic events? Primarily, it is the result of the weakness of state institutions, susceptible to corruption and political pressure. No less acute is the problem of access to justice, especially for those who find themselves on the fringes of society or who dare to speak out against the established order. In the African context, where social and economic inequality often reaches disheartening proportions, and access to education and information is severely limited, the voice of an individual risks being irrevocably lost in the general chaos. And that is precisely why it is so important for those like Zogo and Maseko, who find the courage to speak even when every uttered word carries real danger. No less significant is the psychological dimension of these stories, deserving of separate, deep reflection. Imagine the chilling fear that grips journalists as they realize their next publication could be their last. Picture the unyielding resilience of wives and children who must live on, holding the memory of brutal loss in their hearts and fighting for justice, often encountering only indifference or outright hostility in their path. In each of these instances, we witness not merely victims of crime, but true heroes whose struggles continue to live on in society's memory, inspiring others. As for the case of Martinez Zogo, it undoubtedly continued to unfold. Yet the truth, as is often the case, proved to be far more tangled and multifaceted than initially appeared. Accusations were leveled, and suspected participants were apprehended, But fully uncovering every single aspect of this complex conspiracy, if indeed one existed, proved to be no simple feat. This vividly illustrates how profoundly important it is for society as a whole to support independent media and human rights organizations, for it is they who often become the very last line of defense, separating us from lawlessness and all-consuming corruption. The story of Thulani Rudolph Maseko, unfortunately, still remains largely an unfinished chapter, as the full picture of events, along with the motives of all involved, still awaits definitive clarification. Public attention and the unflagging interest from the international community continue to play a crucial role, reminding the authorities of Eswatini of their difficult yet inescapable responsibility. This serves as a warning, a reminder that the fight for justice does not cease, even when an apparent silence descends. The assassination of Chris Hani, though thoroughly investigated, with the perpetrators found and brought to justice, nevertheless left a deep, indelible mark on the entire political landscape of South Africa. This event acted as a catalyst, sharply reminding everyone of the fragility of democracy and how easily its foundations can be undermined. This case perfectly underscored the vital importance of national reconciliation and the necessity of methodical, persistent work to build a society where such tragedies can never be repeated. Today, as we reflect on those distant events, it becomes crystal clear that the price sometimes paid for power in Africa, as indeed in any other corner of the world, can be truly, horrifyingly high. But simultaneously, something else becomes evident. Even in the most impenetrable, grim conditions, hope always flickers. There are always people ready to selflessly fight for truth, for justice, for a better, brighter future. Their stories are not merely dry reports of crimes committed. They are, above all, vivid testaments to genuine courage, incredible resilience, and an unwavering faith in the unshakable dignity of every human being. Our task is to preserve their memory, to tell their stories, so that their sacrifices are not in vain, and so that our society, both here in Africa and beyond its borders, becomes more just and free. For as long as there are those who dare to speak the truth, as long as there are those who bravely fight for rights, hope for change